The brand still smoked against Ivy's shoulder when they threw her through the gates. She landed hard on her hands and knees, the frozen ground biting through the thin shift they'd left her. All they'd left her, besides the shame and the lie carved into her skin. A whore's mark. 3 jagged lines that would scar silver, visible to any wolf who looked at her for the rest of her life. Crawl back to whatever gutter spawned you, Elena Stormborn called from the watchtower, her voice carrying on the bitter wind like poison wrapped in silk. The Thornvale pack has no place for seductresses who spread their legs for another woman's betrothed. Ivy tried to stand, her legs buckled. 7 months pregnant, beaten for 3 days and now branded. Her body had nothing left to give. But her hands found her belly, found the small life still fighting inside her, and she forced herself upright through sheer fury. I never touched him. The words came out broken, her voice shredded from screaming her innocence to wolves who'd already decided her guilt. He came to my room. He held me down. I never. Liar. A rock struck her temple. Blood ran warm down her cheek, stark against the cold. We all saw how you looked at him, how you flaunted yourself. She hadn't. Goddess above, she hadn't. Marcus Thornvale had cornered her in the herb storage room, his hands tearing at her clothes, his breath hot and rancid against her neck. She'd fought. She'd screamed. She'd clawed his face bloody before 2 of his friends had pulled her off and held her down while he... The memory tried to surface. Ivy shoved it deep, deep into the dark place where she kept all the things that would destroy her if she let them breathe. The next wolf who finds you on Thornvale land has orders to kill on sight, Elena continued, her perfect features twisted with satisfaction. Consider this mercy, little whore. I could have let them tear the bastard from your belly. The gates groaned shut. The sound of it, that final iron rejection, broke something in Ivy's chest that she hadn't known was still intact. She stood alone in the snow, 7 months gone with her rapist's child, wearing nothing but a blood-soaked shift and a brand that proclaimed her a liar. The dark wood stretched before her, ancient and hungry, its shadows already reaching toward the failing light. There was nowhere to go. No family. Her parents had died in a border skirmish 3 years past. No friends. Elena had made certain of that, isolating Ivy systematically for months before the accusation. No pack would take a branded Omega, especially one heavy with unauthorized pregnancy. The wind cut through her thin covering like knives. Inside her belly, the baby shifted, pressed a tiny foot against her palm as if to say, I'm still here. We're still here. I know, little one, Ivy whispered, her teeth already chattering. I know. She started walking. The dark wood swallowed her within minutes, its ancient trees blocking what little remained of the winter light. Ivy had heard stories about these woods. Every pup in the Northern Territories had. They said the trees themselves were hungry, that they'd been fed with the blood of 1,000 wolves during the territory wars. They said things lived in the deepest shadows that weren't wolf, weren't human, weren't anything with a name. They said the Alpha King hunted here. Her foot caught on a root. She went down hard, barely managing to twist so she landed on her side rather than her stomach. Pain lanced up her hip. The fall jarred something loose in her shoulder wound, and fresh blood began to seep through the crude bandage she'd fashioned from her shift's hem. Get up. She couldn't. Get up. Her arms trembled as she pushed herself to sitting. The trees spun around her. When had it gotten so dark? When had the cold started feeling warm? That was bad. Some distant part of her mind remembered that was very bad. Please, she breathed, not sure who she was begging. The goddess? The forest? The child who deserved a mother strong enough to survive this? Please, I can't die here. Not like this. Not with her still inside me. The snow had begun to fall again, thick flakes that caught in her tangled hair and melted against her fevered skin. Ivy crawled forward, then crawled again, her hands leaving bloody prints in the white. The baby kicked frantically, sensing her distress, and Ivy sobbed with the desperate love of it. This child she hadn't asked for, hadn't wanted, but would die to protect. She made it another 20 feet before her arms gave out completely. The snow was soft. That surprised her. She'd expected it to hurt, but it cradled her like a cold embrace, like the earth itself was gathering her close. Her wolf, weak and wounded from the trauma of the past days, stirred feebly inside her. "Run," it urged. "Danger. Run." But Ivy couldn't run, couldn't even lift her head. The best she could manage was to curl around her belly, to wrap her frozen arms around the swell of her child and hope, desperately, impossibly, that someone would find them before the cold finished what Thornvale had started. Hoofbeats. She heard them through the cotton-thick haze of hypothermia, distant and rhythmic, then voices sharp with command. "Over here! There's someone! Goddess above, it's a woman. She's pregnant. Move, you fools, she's pregnant and half-frozen." Hands touched her. Ivy flinched away, a broken sound escaping her throat, because the last hands that had touched her had hurt her, had held her down, had... "Easy, little wolf." A woman's voice, firm but gentle. "We're the king's scouts. You're on royal territory. We're going to help you, do you understand? You're safe now." Safe. The word meant nothing. Safety was a lie wolves told themselves between one disaster and the next, but the hands that lifted her were careful. The cloak that wrapped around her was warm, thick with the scent of pine and something darker, richer, an authority her wolf recognized even in its weakened state. "Alpha," it whispered. Ivy's eyes fluttered open. Through the swirl of snow, she caught a glimpse of dark figures on horseback, military precision in their formation, and at their head, a massive shape that seemed to drink in the shadows rather than cast them, a man too large, too still, watching her with eyes that caught the last light and held it. Then the darkness took her, and she felt nothing at all. Ivy woke to warmth. That was wrong. She remembered cold, remembered snow seeping through her shift, remembered the creeping numbness that had promised an end to pain, remembered curling around her belly and praying to a goddess who never answered. But now there was softness beneath her. Silk, her foggy mind supplied. Silk sheets that whispered against her skin like water. And warmth. Real warmth. Not the treacherous heat of a body surrendering to frost. She kept her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. Old instincts, honed through months of surviving Elena's cruelty. Assess before revealing. Learn the terrain before showing your hand. The room smelled of cedar and beeswax candles. Underneath that, something medical. Herbs she recognized from her training. Feverfew. Willow bark. Someone had treated her wounds. Someone had bandaged the brand on her shoulder because it throbbed with the dull ache of healing rather than the sharp scream of fresh injury. And beneath all of it, threaded through the air like smoke, a scent that made her wolf lift its head for the first time in days, pine forests after rain, dark earth. Something ancient and wild that spoke of mountain winds and moonlit hunts, authority so absolute it pressed against her skin like a physical weight. Alpha. Not just any alpha. Her wolf knew the difference between a pack leader's presence and this gravitational pull that made the air itself feel heavier. This was the kind of power that had carved kingdoms from wilderness, that had united 12 warring territories under a single banner. This was the Alpha King. Ivy's heart slammed against her ribs. Her hands flew to her belly, still round, still whole, still containing the flutter of movement that meant her daughter lived. "She's been kicking for the past hour." The voice came from her right, low and rough, like gravel smoothed by dark water. Strong lungs, if the force is any indication. Her eyes snapped open. He sat in a chair beside her bed, and everything about him was wrong. Wrong for a king, wrong for the monster the stories described. He should have been pacing, commanding, demanding answers about the trespasser found bleeding on his borders. Instead, he sat perfectly still, his massive frame somehow folded into a chair too small for his shoulders, his dark eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that stole her breath. Those eyes. Goddess above. Those eyes. Deep brown, almost black, but shot through with threads of gold that seemed to shift and move like living things. They held centuries of violence and power. She could see the predator lurking in their depths, the wolf that had conquered nations and crushed rebellions and earned the name Duskwalker for his habit of attacking at twilight, when his enemies couldn't tell shadow from death. But they also held something else, something she couldn't name, couldn't understand. He was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd forgotten he was asking. Their gazes locked. Heat. It flooded her chest like sunlight breaking through ice, like spring thaw rushing through frozen rivers. Warmth spread from her heart outward, racing down her arms, her legs, pooling low in her belly where her daughter kicked in sudden recognition. Her wolf surged forward with a keen so loud Ivy was surprised it didn't escape her throat. A sound of recognition, of homecoming, of finally, finally, finally. His sharp inhale cut the silence like a blade. Gold bled into his irises, drowning the dark brown until his eyes blazed amber, until the predator surfaced fully and stared at her with hunger and shock, and something terrifyingly close to reverence. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not threatening, not aggressive, but claiming. The sound of a wolf who had found something precious and would tear apart worlds to keep it. Impossible, he breathed. His hand reached toward her belly as if pulled by invisible thread, as if he couldn't control the movement, as if every instinct he possessed was screaming at him to touch her, claim her, mine, mine, mine. Ivy flinched. She couldn't help it. The last hands that had reached for her had held her down, had bruised her thighs, had... He froze. The gold in his eyes flickered, and something like pain crossed his harsh features. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled his hand back, placed it on his knee, curled his fingers into a fist so tight she could see the tendons straining beneath his skin. "I won't touch you." His voice came out rough, strained, as if the words cost him something vital. "Not without your permission, not ever." Ivy's pulse hammered in her throat. Her mind reeled, trying to make sense of what her body already knew. Mate. The word echoed through her like a bell, resonating in places she hadn't known existed. This monster king, this conqueror of 12 territories, this man whose name made grown alphas flinch. He was her mate. And he was looking at her swollen belly, at the evidence of another man's crime, and his expression held no disgust, no rejection, only that same impossible hunger, tempered now by iron control. "The child," she managed, her voice a ragged whisper. "It's not... I know." 2 words, but they landed like thunder. "I know what was done to you," he continued, each syllable measured, careful. "My scouts recognized the brand, the whore's mark." His jaw tightened. Something dangerous flickered in those golden eyes. "A lie. Anyone with eyes could see you're no seductress. You're a survivor. The child isn't shame, it's proof you endured." Her throat closed. No one had said that. In months of suffering, in weeks of accusation and isolation and violence, no one had looked at her belly and seen anything but evidence of sin, not proof of survival, not testament to her strength. Just shame she should have had the decency to hide. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why do you... How can you..." "Because you're mine." He said it simply, like stating that water was wet or the sun rose in the east. A fact. An immutable truth. The mate bond doesn't care about circumstances, he continued. It doesn't care that you carry another's child, or that you've been branded, or that you collapsed half dead in my forest. It only knows that you belong to me, and I. He stopped, swallowed. The golden glow in his eyes guttered like a candle in wind. And I belong to you, he finished quietly, whether either of us wanted it. Ivy stared at him, the Alpha King. Fenris Duskwalker, if the scouts' whispered conversations while they carried her had been accurate. A man whose reputation painted him in shades of blood and shadow, whose conquests had reshaped the map of the Northern Territories, whose justice was said to be swift and merciless. He was waiting for her to speak. His massive hands, hands that had crushed rebellions and torn out throats, remained perfectly still on his knees, offering no threat. I don't want a mate, she heard herself say. Something flickered across his features. Not anger. Not offense, just acknowledgement. I know. I don't want anyone to touch me, to claim me, to have any rights over my body or my child. I know. Then what do you want? Her voice cracked. Weeks of fear and fury and survival instinct surged up, demanding answers. Why are you here? Why did you save me? What do you expect in return? Fenris was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its edge of command. What remained was rawer, quieter, almost human. I expect nothing, he said. I want... He paused, seeming to struggle with the word. I want you to heal, to feel safe, to know that no one in my kingdom will touch you without your consent, including me. His eyes met hers, and beneath the gold she glimpsed something ancient and lonely. The mate bond is a gift or a curse depending on who receives it. I won't make it your cage. He rose then, and Ivy realized just how massive he truly was, tall enough that the candlelight caught only the lower half of his face when he stood, broad enough to block the doorway completely. A fortress made flesh. A predator choosing against every instinct to walk away. Rest, he said. A healer will check on you in an hour. Your child is strong. She weathered the cold better than you did. She. He'd said she. No one else had bothered to ask, to wonder, to imagine the life inside her as anything but a problem to be solved. How do you know it's a girl? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Fenris paused at the doorway. When he glanced back, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. I don't, he admitted. But you've been whispering to her in your sleep. My little girl, you said. My brave little girl. He was gone before Ivy could respond, the door closing softly behind him. She lay in the silence, her hand pressed to her belly, her wolf churning with confusion and longing and fear. The mate bond pulsed between them like a second heartbeat, warm and insistent, pulling at something deep in her chest. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, treacherous and unbidden, something else stirred. Hope. 3 nights later, Ivy had mapped the rhythms of her gilded cage. The healers came twice daily, a kind-faced beta woman who changed her bandages without commentary, and an elderly wolf who hummed old songs while preparing her medicines. Meals arrived on silver trays carried by silent servants who bowed and retreated without meeting her eyes. The chamber itself was opulent beyond anything she'd known. Tapestries depicting ancient hunts, a fireplace that never seemed to die, a window overlooking gardens even winter couldn't entirely subdue. And every night, when the candles burned low and the palace fell silent, he came. She'd noticed it on the second night. Footsteps in the corridor, too heavy to be servants, too measured to be guards. The door would open just enough to admit a massive shadow, and then nothing. She'd feigned sleep, her heart pounding, waiting for hands that never came. Instead, she'd heard a chair scrape against stone, the soft crack of a book's spine, and then his voice, impossibly gentle, nothing like the growl of their first meeting, reading aloud. Once upon a time, in a forest older than memory, there lived a little wolf who was braver than she knew. A children's tale. He was reading her unborn child a children's story about brave little wolves. Ivy had cried silently into her pillow, her body shaking with sobs she didn't understand. Relief, grief, something dangerously close to tenderness for this monster king who sat beside her bed in darkness and told fairy tales to a baby who couldn't yet hear. Tonight, she decided not to pretend. The door opened at its usual hour. She felt him pause, felt, through that strange new thread between them, his surprise when he sensed she was awake. But he entered anyway, settling into the chair that had become his chair, the book already in his hands. "You knew," she said quietly, "all this time. You knew I could hear you." Silence. Then, "I suspected." "Why?" She turned her head on the pillow to look at him, her eyes adjusted enough to the dimness to make out his profile, the strong jaw, the blade-straight nose, the shadows that seemed to cling to him like loyal hounds. "Why read to her?" Fenris was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice had lost all traces of the Alpha King. "Because I remember what it was like to be small and afraid," he said. "And I remember the sound of my mother's voice telling stories in the dark. It was the only time I felt safe." His thumb traced the spine of the book, back and forth, a nervous gesture that seemed wrong on a man so controlled. "Your daughter has already survived more than most wolves face in a lifetime. She deserves to know that there's gentleness in the world, too. That not everything is cold and cruel and—" He stopped, swallowed. "And I think," he finished quietly, "you both deserve to know that someone is watching over you. Even if you don't want me, even if you never want me, I'll read to her anyway. I'll guard your door anyway. Because that's what the bond demands. And because—" His voice broke on something rough and raw. "Because no one should wake up in darkness alone." Ivy's throat ached. Her wolf pressed against her chest, whimpering with a need she couldn't name. "What was the story about?" she whispered. "The first night. I only caught pieces." The book cracked open again. In the darkness, she heard him smile. "Once upon a time, in a forest older than memory, there lived a little wolf who was braver than she knew. Her name was Moon, and she had silver fur and eyes like starlight, and she was afraid of absolutely everything. The shadows between trees, the hooting of owls, the way the wind made branches creak and groan." His voice washed over her like warm water. Ivy closed her eyes, her hand on her belly, and let herself drift on the current of his words. She didn't notice when she fell asleep. But she noticed, much later, when she woke to thin morning light. Noticed the blanket that had been tucked more firmly around her shoulders, the fresh flowers on her bedside table, the lingering scent of pine and moonlight. And the tears were already falling before she understood why. The confrontation came on the 5th day. Ivy had finally been cleared to leave her chambers, her wounds healed enough to walk without risking the stitches. A servant had brought her a simple gown, soft wool in forest green, warm and modest, and nothing like the finery she glimpsed on the noble wolves who passed her in the corridors. They stared. Of course they stared. She was visibly pregnant, obviously not the queen, and the whispers followed her like shadows. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why is the king keeping a branded Omega in the royal wing? Ivy kept her chin high and her pace steady. She'd survived worse than whispers, but Lord Ashford proved worse than whispers. She encountered him in the gallery overlooking the main hall, a thin, reedy man with cold eyes and a smile that reminded her viscerally of Elena. He stepped into her path as she tried to pass, his lip curling with distaste as his gaze dropped to her belly. "So you're the king's new pet," he said, loud enough for the half-dozen courtiers nearby to hear. "The stray carrying another man's bastard." Ivy's blood iced over. Her wolf snarled, but she kept her voice level. "Excuse me. I need to pass. What you need is to know your place." Lord Ashford stepped closer, his scent, something cloying and rotten beneath expensive perfume, flooding her senses. "You may have fooled our king with your pathetic damsel act, but we see what you are. A whore who spread her legs for one alpha and is now trying to trap another." The word whore hit like a fist, like the brand that still throbbed on her shoulder. "I didn't," she started, but her voice cracked. "Save your tears for someone who cares." Lord Ashford's smile widened. "The court remembers what happens to wolves who try to manipulate the crown. You'll be thrown out with the rest of the garbage soon enough, and your bastard, she carries my heir now." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, deep as thunder, cold as the grave. The courtiers scattered like leaves before a storm. Lord Ashford spun, his face draining of color as Fenris stepped out of the shadows he'd somehow been occupying. He didn't look at Ivy. His eyes were fixed on Lord Ashford with an intensity that made the older wolf stumble backward. My king, I didn't realize." "Speak of her again without respect," Fenris continued, his voice terrifyingly soft. "And I'll forget you have a tongue." The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed. No one moved. Lord Ashford's throat worked convulsively, but no sound emerged. Then Fenris's hand found the small of Ivy's back, warm, steady, claiming, and guided her past the frozen courtier without another word. They walked in silence until they reached a small courtyard, empty of witnesses. Only then did Fenris release her, stepping back to give her space, his expression carefully neutral. "You shouldn't have done that," Ivy said. Her voice shook. "Now they'll say you're under the king's protection." His tone brooked no argument. "They'll say that insulting you means insulting me, and they'll say that anyone who harms you will answer to me personally. But I'm not yours." The words came out harder than she intended. "I haven't agreed to anything. The bond doesn't mean. I know what the bond means." For the first time, something like frustration flickered across his features. "And I know what you've suffered. Even if you haven't told me the details, I can feel it through the thread between us. Every flinch when someone moves too quickly, every nightmare that wakes you gasping, every time your wolf curls up small inside you because it learned that's the only way to survive." Ivy's breath caught. "I didn't claim you in there because I think I own you," Fenris continued. "I claimed you because wolves like Ashford only understand one language: power. He needed to know that touching you means challenging me. That's all." He ran a hand through his dark hair. Another nervous gesture, another crack in the fortress. "I won't apologize for protecting you," he said quietly. "But I will apologize if I overstepped. If you'd rather face them alone, I'll respect that. He exhaled. "I couldn't listen to him call you those things and do nothing. My wolf would have torn me apart from the inside." Ivy stared at him. This wasn't the monster the stories described. This was a man at war with himself, trying desperately to balance the demands of his wolf against her fragile boundaries. "He called my daughter a bastard," she heard herself say. "I know. She's not. She's mine. She's all I have left. And she's not. She's not his. She's not Marcus's. She's mine." The dam broke. Weeks of grief and terror and survival instinct crumbled, and suddenly she was crying, ugly, heaving sobs that she couldn't control, couldn't stop, couldn't. Fenris didn't touch her. He simply stood there, a wall between her and the world, and let her fall apart. When she finally quieted, her face blotchy and her shift damp with tears, he spoke again. "She's yours," he agreed. And if you let me, she'll be mine too. Not because I fathered her, but because she'll grow up in my home, under my protection, loved by. He stopped, started again. She'll want for nothing. I swear it on my crown and my blood and every ancestor who carried the Duskwalker name. Ivy looked at him, really looked, past the reputation and the power and the golden eyes that still made her wolf keen with recognition. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that? Why would you want a child that isn't yours? Fenris's expression softened. For just a moment he looked almost young. Because she's part of you, he said simply. And anything that's part of you will be precious to me. That's what the bond means. That's what mate means. He turned to leave, giving her privacy to collect herself. But at the archway, he paused. The reading tonight, he said. Would you like me to stay longer? There's a story about a brave little wolf who fights a shadow beast. I think your daughter would like it. Ivy's hands found her belly. Inside, her daughter kicked, strong and fierce, just like he'd said. Yes, she heard herself answer. I think she would. The smile Fenris gave her was small, hesitant, nothing like a king's smile. But it reached his eyes, and Ivy felt something shift behind her ribs. A wall she hadn't known she'd built started, slowly, to crumble. The night after her breakdown in the courtyard, Ivy couldn't sleep. She lay in the silk sheets that still felt foreign against her skin, one hand resting on her belly where her daughter had finally settled into stillness and stared at the canopy above her bed. Moonlight filtered through the gauze curtains, casting silver patterns across the fabric, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Long and mournful, answered moments later by another. Fenris had read to her for nearly an hour, the story about the brave little wolf and the shadow beast, just as he'd promised. His voice had been impossibly gentle, pitched low enough that Ivy had felt her own eyelids growing heavy despite herself. When he'd finally closed the book and risen to leave, she'd been balanced on the edge of sleep, warm and safe in a way she hadn't felt since before her parents died. But the moment his footsteps faded down the corridor, the warmth had drained away. Now she lay awake, turning his words over in her mind like river stones. Because she's part of you, and anything that's part of you will be precious to me. Her wolf stirred restlessly, pressing against her ribs. The bond hummed between them still, a golden thread she could almost see when she closed her eyes, stretching from her chest through the stone walls to wherever Fenris slept tonight. She wondered if he felt it too. If it kept him awake, this impossible connection to a broken woman carrying another man's child. Not another man's, she corrected herself fiercely. Mine. Only mine. A soft knock at her door made her sit up sharply, her heart lurching into her throat. It was well past midnight. Too late for healers, too late for servants. Her wolf bristled, defensive instincts flooding her with the urge to find a weapon, find an escape route, find Ivy. Fenris's voice, low and tight through the wood. I need you to stay calm. She was already throwing back the covers, her bare feet hitting the cold stone as she crossed to the door. When she opened it, Fenris stood in the corridor dressed in hastily donned clothes, his dark hair disheveled, his jaw tight with something that looked disturbingly like controlled fury. What's happened? She demanded. A diplomatic envoy arrived an hour ago, from Thornvale. The name hit her like a physical blow. Ivy's hand flew to her belly, protective and instinctive, as ice flooded her veins. No. They're claiming it's about border negotiations, trade agreements. Fenris's gold-flecked eyes held hers, and through the bond, she felt the truth he wasn't saying. The envoy is led by Elena Stormborn. Ivy's knees buckled. Fenris caught her before she could fall, his massive hands closing around her arms with surprising gentleness. The touch sent warmth flooding through her. His warmth, his steadiness, his barely leashed protectiveness. but even that couldn't quiet the storm of panic building in her chest. She can't be here, Ivy gasped. She can't. Fenris, she won't touch you. The words came out as a growl, low and lethal. No one from Thornvale will come within 50 feet of you without my explicit permission. I've already given the orders. You don't understand. Ivy's voice cracked. Elena doesn't need to touch me. She destroys people with words, with whispers, with lies so well crafted that everyone believes them. She spent months turning the pack against me before she finally accused me of seducing Marcus. By the time she was done, even people who'd known me my whole life wouldn't look me in the eye. She was trembling. She could feel it. Couldn't stop it. Couldn't control the shaking that had seized her limbs, or the way her wolf was curling up small and terrified inside her chest. Ivy. Fenris's voice dropped, and he ducked his head to meet her eyes. Look at me. She did. His pupils had expanded until only a thin ring of amber remained, and something ancient and dangerous looked back at her. His wolf, she realized, rising to meet the threat against its mate. I am not the Thornvale pack, he said quietly. I don't make decisions based on whispers. I've conquered 12 territories by knowing the difference between truth and manipulation. Elena Stormborn can spread whatever poison she likes. It won't touch you here. She's clever, Ivy whispered. Cleverer than you know. So am I. A grim smile crossed his features. And I have something she doesn't. What? The mate bond. His thumb traced a gentle circle against her arm, soothing without demanding. Whatever she tells them, I'll know the truth. I feel it, Ivy. Every time your heart races with fear rather than lies, every time shame twists through you because of something done to you rather than something you did. She can't deceive me about you, because you're already written in my blood. The fierce certainty in his voice made her throat tight. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately that her wolf keened with longing. She tried to kill me, Ivy heard herself say. Before the branding. She cornered me in the kitchens and told me exactly what was going to happen. How she'd convinced Marcus's friends to hold me down. How she'd made sure no one would believe my accusations. How she was going to enjoy watching me burn. She enjoyed it, Fenris. The suffering. She said I should have known better than to catch Marcus's eye, that some women were born to be used and discarded. Fenris went very still. The gold in his eyes blazed brighter, and a low growl rumbled from his chest, not directed at her, but at the memory, at the woman who'd caused this damage. She's dead, he said flatly. You can't kill a diplomatic envoy. Watch me. Fenris. Ivy's hand found his chest, pressing against the solid warmth of him. Through the thin fabric of his shirt, she could feel his heart pounding. Not with fear, but with barely contained rage. If you kill her without cause, you'll start a war. The other territories are already nervous about your power. They're waiting for an excuse to unite against you. His jaw tightened. She watched him fight for control, watched the war between his wolf's demands and his king's responsibilities play out across his harsh features. I won't let her hurt you again, he said finally. Whatever it takes. I know. And somehow, despite everything, she did. They stood there in the doorway for a long moment, his hands still steadying her, the bond humming between them like a plucked string. Ivy should have pulled away, should have retreated to the safety of her borrowed room and the silk sheets that still smelled faintly of pine and snow. Instead, she said, "Will you stay?" Fenris's breath caught. Not. Heat flooded her cheeks. I mean, the reading. You could read to her. To us. I don't think I can sleep otherwise, knowing Elena's somewhere in this palace. Something softened in his expression. That small, hesitant smile that reached his eyes. I'll get the book, he said. 3 days later, Elena made her move. Ivy had been careful. She'd stayed in the royal wing as much as possible, venturing out only when Fenris or one of his trusted guards accompanied her. She'd seen Elena only once, across the length of the great hall during a formal dinner, a glimpse of golden hair and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Their eyes had met for just a moment, and Elena's lips had curved into something that looked almost like triumph. But nothing had happened. No confrontations, no whispered accusations, no carefully crafted poison dripping into the court's ear. Until now. Ivy was in the palace library, a quiet sanctuary she'd discovered on her 4th day. Fenris had shown it to her himself, his voice going soft as he described how his mother had spent hours here, how he still remembered the smell of the old books mixing with her honeysuckle perfume. Ivy had found a cushioned window seat overlooking the gardens, a spot where afternoon sunlight pooled warm and golden, and she'd been spending her days there, reading, resting, letting her daughter kick against the gentle pressure of her hand. She didn't hear Elena approach. My. The voice was silk over steel, achingly familiar. The little kitchen wolf, dressed in fine wool and living in the royal wing. How far you've fallen upward. Ivy's book slipped from her fingers. Elena stood between the towering shelves, blocking the path to the door. She was even more beautiful than Ivy remembered, golden hair cascading over shoulders draped in blue velvet, pale eyes glittering with cold amusement. The smile on her face was the same one she'd worn in the kitchen when she described in precise detail how Ivy's life was about to be destroyed. Elena. Ivy's voice came out steadier than she felt. You're not supposed to be within 50 feet of me. Oh, that. Elena waved a dismissive hand. The king's orders are so restrictive, and I simply had to see how you're faring. After all, I've been so worried about you. She advanced slowly, each step deliberate, predatory. Ivy's wolf snarled inside her chest, but her body wouldn't move, couldn't move. She was frozen the way she'd been frozen in that kitchen, paralyzed by old terror and new helplessness. The court's been whispering, you know, Elena continued, about the stray the Alpha King dragged in from the snow, about the bastard in her belly and the brand on her shoulder. Some are saying you must have bewitched him, a common whore, seducing the most powerful wolf in the northern territories. It defies reason. That's not... But I've been setting them straight. Elena's smile widened. I've been telling them the truth. That you're a victim, really. A poor, damaged thing who doesn't know any better than to spread her legs for any alpha who looks her way. That the baby could belong to anyone, maybe even multiple someones. That the king should be pitied for being trapped by the mate bond with such damaged goods. Each word was a knife, sliding between Ivy's ribs. Her hands shook against her belly, and she felt her daughter shift restlessly inside her, responding to the flood of distress. You're lying, Ivy whispered. About me. About everything. Am I? Elena tilted her head. The funny thing about lies, Ivy, is that they only need to sound true. And your story? An Omega nobody, pregnant and branded, somehow catching the eye of the Alpha King? It sounds like a fairy tale, a fantasy, and the court is already starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the fantasy is too good to be real. She stepped closer, and Ivy flinched back against the window. Don't worry, Elena murmured. I won't touch you. I know better than that. The king has eyes everywhere, and I'm not interested in exile. But I don't need to touch you to destroy you. I'll do it the same way I did before, word by word, whisper by whisper, until everyone sees you the way I do, a broken, worthless thing that should have died in the snow. A low growl rumbled through the library. Elena spun, her face going pale. Fenris stood in the doorway, and there was nothing human in his eyes. Pure gold blazed from irises gone completely amber, and his lips were pulled back to reveal teeth that had begun to sharpen. The shadow he cast seemed to stretch across the floor, swallowing the light, drinking in the very air. "You were warned," he said. "Your Majesty." Elena's voice quivered, but she rallied quickly, dropping into a curtsy. "I was merely checking on an old friend, making sure she's comfortable." "Leave." The word hit like a physical force. Elena staggered, her wolf nature compelling her to submit to the dominance rolling off him in waves. For a moment, her mask cracked, raw hatred twisting her beautiful features into something ugly, but she recovered. She always recovered. "Of course, Your Majesty," she said smoothly. "I meant no harm." She retreated toward the door, but, as she passed Fenris, she paused, just for a heartbeat, just long enough to murmur, low enough that only wolf hearing could catch it. Ask her what really happened in the herb storage room. Ask her who she went to willingly. Then she was gone. Ivy couldn't breathe. Fenris crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands finding her shoulders, his gold-rimmed eyes searching her face. "What did she say to you? Before I arrived, what did she say?" "Lies," Ivy managed. "Just lies." But through the bond, she felt his uncertainty pulse, the tiny seed of doubt that Elena had planted with her parting words. Ask her who she went to willingly. Ivy's vision blurred with tears. This was how it started. This was always how it started. Elena's poison, seeping in drop by drop, until even the people who loved her couldn't look at her without wondering. "Ivy." Fenris's voice was rough. "I need you to tell me what happened. All of it. Not because I believe her. I don't. But because I need to understand what she's going to try." "I can't." The words tore out of her. "I can't say it. I can't." "Then show me." She looked up at him, confused. "The bond." He pressed his forehead to hers, close enough that she could feel his breath warm on her lips. "You can show me through the bond. Just think it. Let it flow across. I won't judge. I won't turn away. Whatever happened, Ivy, whatever she did to you, it won't change how I see you." Ivy closed her eyes, and for the first time since the branding, she let someone see the truth. The memories flowed between them like water. Marcus's hand clamping over her mouth, the storage room door slamming shut, the weight of his friends holding her down. Elena's laughter echoing afterward. The brand pressed to her shoulder while she screamed. The endless, suffocating isolation of watching everyone she knew turn their backs. When it was over, when the bond finally settled back into its normal hum, Ivy was crying, and Fenris was utterly still. "I'm going to kill them," he said quietly. "Every single one of them. Marcus, his friends, every wolf who held you down or looked away or branded your skin because a jealous woman told them to. I'm going to tear Thornvale apart until there's nothing left but ash." "Fenris." "No." His voice cracked, and she realized with a start that his cheeks were wet too. "They hurt you. They hurt you. And they hurt our daughter. And they sent you into the snow to die. There is no forgiveness for that. There is no diplomacy that makes it acceptable. Elena Stormborn will burn for what she's done. I swear it on." Ivy kissed him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it. She just leaned up and pressed her lips to his, swallowing his vow, silencing the fury that was building in him like a storm. He made a strangled sound against her mouth. His hands found her waist, trembling with the effort of holding back. And for a long moment they simply breathed each other in. When Ivy finally pulled away, his eyes were molten gold and his chest was heaving. "You're right," she said softly. "She'll burn. But not because you slaughter them like a monster. Because I expose her as one. Let me do it my way, Fenris. Let me be the one who ends this." He stared at her, and slowly, achingly, he nodded. "Whatever you need," he said. "I'm yours." That night, Ivy found the letters. She'd been too restless to sleep after Elena's confrontation, and when Fenris had finally left her chambers, reluctantly, his hand lingering on her cheek, she'd wandered to the window to watch the moon rise over the gardens. That's when she'd heard the voices. Two figures stood in the shadows below, their conversation carried on the wind just clearly enough for Wolf hearing to catch. One voice she recognized instantly, Elena. The other was male, unfamiliar, speaking with the clipped accent of the Eastern Territories. "The king is distracted," Elena was saying. "The stray has him wrapped around her finger. If we move during the full moon gathering, the other alphas won't risk it without proof he's weakened. Then I'll give them proof." Elena's laugh was cold. "I've been corresponding with your lords for weeks. They know what to expect. All I need is to eliminate the girl before she whelps, and the king will be vulnerable enough to challenge." Ice flooded Ivy's veins. She pressed herself against the window frame, heart hammering, as Elena continued. "The poison is ready. I'll put it in her evening tea tomorrow night. Slow-acting, undetectable. She'll go into early labor, and neither she nor the bastard will survive. The king will be destroyed by grief. And when the Eastern Alphas challenge him, they'll find nothing but a broken wolf waiting." Ivy's hand flew to her belly. Her daughter kicked, strong and fierce, fighting even now. Ivy didn't scream, didn't run, didn't collapse. She memorized every word. And when the figures finally separated and the garden fell silent, she crossed to the writing desk in the corner of her room and began to plan. Elena wanted to destroy her with poison and whispers. Ivy would destroy Elena with truth. The morning dawned cold and clear, frost painting the windows of Ivy's chambers in delicate spirals. She hadn't slept. How could she, with Elena's words echoing in her mind like a death knell? "The poison is ready. I'll put it in her evening tea tomorrow night." Tonight. Elena would strike tonight. Ivy stood at her writing desk, the letters she'd drafted spread before her. Not poison, but evidence. She'd spent hours transcribing everything she'd overheard, every detail of Elena's conspiracy with the Eastern Lords. But written words could be dismissed as fabrication. A branded Omega's accusations against a high-born woman would be laughed out of court. No, she needed something more powerful, something undeniable. Her hand drifted to her belly, where her daughter shifted restlessly, responding to the tension coiling through Ivy's body. The baby had been active all night, as if she too sensed the danger circling closer. "I won't let her hurt you," Ivy whispered. "I swear it on everything I am." A knock at her door made her heart slam against her ribs, but it was only the elderly healer bringing her morning tea. Tea Ivy wouldn't touch. Not today. Not until Elena was exposed. "You look pale, child," the healer murmured, setting down the tray. "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough." The lie came easily. "Is the king in council this morning?" The full court assembles at midday for the diplomatic address. The Thornvale envoy requested a formal audience before they depart. The healer's eyes were kind but worried. "You're not planning to attend? In your condition?" "I'm planning to do exactly what needs to be done." The healer left, still frowning, and Ivy began to dress. Not in the soft gowns the palace seamstresses had provided, but in something simpler. A dress the color of deep wine, fitted close beneath her breasts to accommodate her belly. She left her hair loose, the way it had been when they'd found her in the snow. Let them see her as she truly was. Not a polished court lady, but a survivor. Let them see the brand on her shoulder when she pushed back the fabric. Let them see everything Elena had done. The great hall was packed when Ivy arrived. Nobles from a dozen territories filled the benches along the walls, their whispered conversations falling silent as she appeared in the doorway. At the front of the hall, Fenris sat on his throne, his dark eyes finding her immediately. Gold flickered at the edges of his irises. Concern, she realized. Through the bond, she felt him reaching for her, questioning. "Trust me," she sent back. "Please." His jaw tightened, but he didn't rise, didn't stop her. Elena stood before the throne, radiant in silver silk, her diplomatic smile firmly in place. She was mid-sentence when Ivy entered. Something about renewed friendship between our territories and unfortunate misunderstandings. And so Thornvale extends its deepest apologies for any distress caused to those who sought refuge here, Elena was saying, her voice honey smooth. We hope this small delegation might mark the beginning of I invoke the Truth Circle. Ivy's voice rang through the hall like a struck bell. Every head turned. Elena's smile froze on her face. I, Ivy of No Pack, carrying an unborn daughter, invoke the ancient rite of the Truth Circle. Ivy walked forward, her steps steady despite the trembling in her hands. I name Elena Stormborn as my accuser and my accused. I demand the right to speak my truth before this court, where no wolf can lie. Murmurs erupted. The Truth Circle was old magic, older than the territories, older than the alphas who ruled them. Within its bounds, falsehood became physically impossible. No wolf could speak an untruth once the circle was drawn. This is absurd. Elena's composure cracked, just slightly. Your Majesty, surely you won't allow. The right is her right. Fenris's voice was iron. Any wolf may invoke it against one who has wronged them. Unless you refuse? His eyes gleamed gold. Unless you're afraid of what truth might reveal? Elena's hands fisted in her silver skirts. For a heartbeat, Ivy saw the calculation in her eyes, the desperate search for escape. But the court was watching. The Eastern lords Elena had been conspiring with were watching. Of course not, Elena said, her smile returning, sharp as broken glass. I have nothing to hide. The court historian, an ancient wolf with silver braids, came forward to draw the circle. He used chalk mixed with wolfsbane ash, the old way, the binding way. The lines glowed faintly as he completed them, and Ivy felt the magic settle over her skin like a second heartbeat. Elena stepped into the circle across from her. This close, Ivy could see the hatred beneath her beauty, the cold calculation that had orchestrated months of suffering. Let us begin, the historian intoned. Within this circle, only truth may be spoken. Falsehood will choke in the throat. So it was sworn. So it remains. Ivy drew a breath. This was the moment. This was everything. 6 months ago, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Marcus Thornvale cornered me in the herb storage room where I worked. He told me I was beautiful. He told me no one would believe me if I screamed. He was right. The words hurt. Every syllable felt like glass in her throat, but she forced them out, forced herself to stand tall, to meet the eyes of the nobles who were staring at her with expressions ranging from pity to disgust to dawning understanding. He raped me. The word landed like a stone in still water. When I fought back, when I clawed his face, 2 of his friends held me down while he finished. Afterward, I was branded with a whore's mark and cast into the snow to die. All because she, Ivy pointed at Elena, couldn't bear the thought that her betrothed might want someone else. That's a lie. Elena's face had gone white. She seduced him. Everyone in Thornvale knows. But the words choked off. Elena's hands flew to her throat, her eyes bulging as the Truth Circle's magic rejected the falsehood she'd tried to speak. You can't lie here, Ivy said softly. Neither can I. So let me tell you what I overheard last night, while you stood in the garden plotting my murder. Elena's expression shifted from fury to fear. You've been corresponding with the Eastern Lords for weeks, Ivy continued. You promised them a weakened Alpha King, a wolf destroyed by grief. Tonight, you plan to put poison in my evening tea. Slow acting, undetectable. You wanted me to go into early labor. You wanted my daughter and me to die so Fenris would be vulnerable enough to challenge during the full moon gathering. The court erupted. Nobles surged to their feet, voices overlapping in shock and outrage. But Ivy wasn't finished. Speak, she demanded, stepping closer to Elena. Tell them the truth. The circle won't let you do anything else. Elena's face contorted. She fought the compulsion. Ivy could see her struggling, her jaw clenched, her whole body rigid with the effort of holding back words that wanted to pour out. But the truth circle was older than her will, older than her schemes. Yes, Elena gasped, the confession torn from her against her will. I poisoned the tea. I conspired with the Eastern Lords. I wanted her dead. I wanted them both dead, because she was supposed to be nothing. Tears of rage streaked Elena's perfect cheeks. A broken, pregnant nobody. She should have died in the snow. I made sure she had nothing, no friends, no pack, no hope, and somehow she still survived. She found the Alpha King. She was supposed to suffer, and instead she found enough. Fenris rose from his throne. The single word silenced the hall. He descended the steps slowly, each footfall echoing in the sudden quiet. When he reached the truth circle, he didn't enter it. He simply stood at its edge, looking down at Elena with eyes that had gone completely gold. Elena Stormborn, he said, his voice carrying the weight of 12 territories and centuries of wolf law. You are found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder against my mate and my unborn heir. You are found guilty of treasonous correspondence with foreign alphas. You are found guilty of the false accusations that led to the branding and exile of an innocent woman. Elena fell to her knees, her composure finally shattering. Please, Your Majesty, I was desperate. I loved him. I only wanted... You wanted power. Fenris's voice held no mercy. You wanted to be queen, and when a kitchen wolf stood in your way, you had her raped and branded and left to freeze. There is no forgiveness for that. There is no mercy that reaches deep enough. He turned to the assembled court. By the authority vested in me as Alpha King, I pronounce sentence. Elena Stormborn is hereby stripped of her pack bonds and exiled to the wastelands. She will walk alone until the end of her days, with no wolf to run beside her and no pack to call home. No, Elena screamed. You can't. The bond, it will... But Fenris had already raised his hand. The power of the Alpha King, the authority that held 12 territories together, flowed through him like a river of gold. Ivy felt it pulse through their growing bond, felt the terrible weight of what he was about to do. He pulled. Elena's shriek split the air as invisible threads tore away from her soul. The pack bond, that essential connection that tied every wolf to their kin, ripped free with an almost audible snap. Elena collapsed, writhing as the emptiness flooded in. You are nothing, Fenris said quietly. You belong to no one, and you will die alone, with no wolf to mourn your passing. Guards stepped forward to drag Elena from the hall. She fought them, sobbing, screaming curses that the truth circle wouldn't let her complete. As she passed Ivy, their eyes met. I see you, Ivy said softly. I see everything you are, and you were wrong about me. I'm not a broken, worthless thing. I'm the nobody who just watched you kneel. Elena's scream echoed through the hall long after she was gone. The court dispersed slowly, nobles murmuring among themselves, casting looks at Ivy that ranged from curious to respectful. The Eastern lords who had conspired with Elena had disappeared, likely fleeing before Fenris's attention turned to them. There would be reckoning later, Ivy knew. But not today. Today, she had won. Fenris found her in the small garden courtyard, sitting on the stone bench where he'd first touched her face. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and her daughter was finally still. Peaceful, perhaps, now that the danger had passed. You should have told me what you were planning. His voice was rough as he settled beside her. I would have supported you. I know. Ivy leaned into his warmth, feeling the bond pulse between them, stronger now, more certain. But I needed to do it myself. I needed to be the one who ended it. He was quiet for a moment. Then his arm came around her shoulders, and he pressed his lips to her hair. You were magnificent, he murmured. Terrifying and magnificent. When you walked into that hall, I thought my heart would stop. I was shaking the entire time. No one could tell. His hand found her belly, spreading warm and protective over the swell of their daughter. She'll hear stories about today. About her mother, who walked into a court of wolves and demanded truth when everyone else wanted silence. Ivy's throat tightened. I didn't do it alone. You believed me, even when Elena tried to poison you against me. There was never any poison that could touch this. He took her hand, pressed it to his chest where his heart beat steady and strong. I felt you, Ivy. From the moment you opened your eyes in that bed, I felt you. Everything you are, everything you've survived. How could I believe lies about someone whose soul I can feel against my own? She turned to look at him. This powerful, feared Alpha King who read children's stories to her belly and held her through nightmares and looked at her like she was precious beyond measure. I want you to mark me, she whispered. His breath caught. Gold flooded his irises, his wolf surging forward at the invitation. Are you certain? His voice had gone rough, deeper. Once it's done, it can never be undone. You'll be bound to me, to this territory, to this life, forever. I know. She reached up, traced the harsh line of his jaw with trembling fingers. I want forever. I want you. I want our daughter to grow up knowing her parents chose each other, claimed each other, belonged to each other. A sound escaped him. Half growl, half groan. He pulled her closer, and his lips found hers in a kiss that tasted like promises. Not here, he managed against her mouth. Not in a garden where anyone could see. You deserve, goddess, you deserve so much more than take me somewhere private. She nipped at his lower lip, and his whole body shuddered. Take me somewhere and make me yours. He didn't need to be told twice. His chambers were vast, far larger than her own, but Ivy barely registered the details. She was aware of firelight, of warmth, of silk sheets the color of midnight. And Fenris, his massive frame blocking out everything else as he guided her to the bed, with hands that shook. I've never done this, he admitted, his forehead pressed to hers. Marked someone. I never found anyone I wanted badly enough to bind myself to forever. Then we'll figure it out together. Ivy tugged at his shirt, and he helped her pull it over his head, revealing the broad expanse of his chest. Scars marked his skin, a warrior's history written in silver lines, and she traced each one with reverent fingers. You're beautiful, she told him. His laugh was ragged. I'm a monster. No. She pulled him down to her, cradling his face between her palms. You're the man who reads to my belly every night in a voice softer than moonlight. You're the father of my daughter. Maybe not by blood, but by choice, by love, by every moment you've spent protecting us. You're mine, Fenris Duskwalker. And I'm about to make sure everyone knows it. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was air. His hands found the ties of her gown, loosening them with surprising gentleness given the intensity burning in his gold-shot eyes. When the fabric fell away, his gaze traveled over her, the swell of her belly, the brand on her shoulder, every imperfect inch of her. Mine, he growled. All of you. Mine to protect. Mine to cherish. Mine. He kissed his way down her throat, and Ivy felt her awareness narrow to the sensation of his lips against her pulse. This was where the mark would go, the junction of neck and shoulder, where the claiming bite would bind them together forever. Ready? His breath was hot against her skin. Yes. His teeth sank into her flesh. Pain flared bright and sharp, but only for a heartbeat. Then it transformed, blooming into warmth that spread through her veins like honey, like sunlight, like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. The bond between them cracked open, and suddenly she could feel him, not just beside her, but inside her, woven into the very fabric of her soul. She felt his loneliness. Years and years of it, a cold throne and an empty bed and a kingdom that feared him more than it loved him. She felt his desperate hope when he'd first seen her, unconscious in the snow. She felt his terror when Elena had threatened her, and his fierce joy when she'd confronted her accuser in the hall. She felt how much he loved her. The emotion flooded through the bond like a tidal wave, washing away every doubt, every fear, every lingering wound from her past. He loved her. This powerful, terrifying Alpha King loved her, a branded Omega with nothing to offer but herself. Your turn, he rasped against her throat, and she understood. Ivy pulled his shoulder toward her mouth, found the spot where his neck met the hard muscle of his shoulder, and bit down. He groaned, a sound of pure surrender, as her teeth broke skin. Through the bond, she felt the mark taking hold, felt herself being woven into him, just as he was woven into her. No more separation, no more uncertainty. They were two halves of one whole, bound by blood and choice and love. Mine, she whispered against his skin. Yours. His arms wrapped around her, cradling her close, and she felt the bond settle between them like a physical thing, warm and golden and utterly unbreakable. Always yours, mate. They held each other as the firelight danced across the walls. Outside, the moon rose over the territories, over the kingdom that would soon know its new Luna, its new queen. But for now, in this room, there was only this. Two wolves who had found each other against impossible odds, their bond humming between them like a song. I love you, Ivy murmured against his chest. She felt his smile through their connection. I love you too. Both of you. His hand found her belly, and their daughter kicked, strong and sure, as if she already knew she was safe. Spring came early to the Northern Territories. The coronation was held in the great hall where Elena had been exposed, but the space had been transformed. Flowers cascaded from every pillar, early blooms that shouldn't have existed yet, but the territory itself seemed to celebrate its new Luna. The nobles who had watched Ivy invoke the Truth Circle now knelt before her as she received the crown. It was a delicate thing, wrought silver set with moonstones that caught the light like captured stars. Fenris placed it on her head himself, his hands steady, his eyes shining with pride. Rise, Luna Ivy Duskwalker, he proclaimed, Queen of the 12 territories, mother of my heir, my mate, my heart, my home. The hall erupted in cheers. 2 months later, their daughter was born. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when the midwives finally placed the squalling infant in Ivy's arms, she burst into tears. The baby had her father's dark eyes, deep brown shot through with threads of gold, and her mother's stubborn chin. She was perfect. We never decided on a name, Fenris murmured, curled around them both in the enormous bed. Ivy studied her daughter's face, watching those tiny features scrunch with displeasure at the brightness of the world. She thought of Elena, broken and exiled, walking alone through the wastelands. She thought of Marcus and his friends, who had fled Thornvale when word of Elena's defeat reached them, only to be hunted down by Fenris's wolves. She thought of the snow and the cold, and the moment she'd been certain she would die. Aurora, she said finally, for the light that comes after the longest night. Fenris pressed a kiss to Aurora's dark downy hair. Aurora Duskwalker, Princess of the 12 territories, the most loved pup in the history of wolves. That night, after Aurora was asleep in her cradle and the palace had finally quieted, Fenris appeared in the doorway of their chambers with a book in his hands. "She's sleeping," Ivy pointed out, amused. "You can skip story time." "Can't." He settled into the chair beside the cradle, the same chair he'd occupied all those months ago when he'd read to Ivy's belly without knowing she was awake. "I made a promise. Every night. Besides, she should hear the story of how her parents met." Ivy laughed softly. "The version where her mother collapsed in the snow and her father was so besotted he sat vigil by her bed for 3 days? The version where the bravest wolf I ever knew survived something impossible and walked into my court to demand justice from the wolves who'd wronged her." He opened the book, though his eyes never left Ivy's face. "The version where she made me fall in love with her just by existing. Romantic. Truthful." He smiled, that rare, unguarded smile that was only ever for her. "Come here." She went. In the cradle, Aurora sighed in her sleep, her tiny fingers curling around nothing. The bond between Ivy and Fenris hummed steady and warm, filled with contentment, with love, with the fierce joy of having built something beautiful from the ashes of something terrible. Fenris began to read. His voice was softer than moonlight, filling the room with stories of brave little wolves and magical forests and happily ever afters. Aurora would hear this voice every night of her childhood. She would grow up knowing she was wanted, treasured, protected by parents who had chosen each other against impossible odds. Ivy leaned her head against Fenris's shoulder and closed her eyes. Outside, the spring wind carried the scent of new beginnings. Somewhere in the wastelands, Elena walked alone, stripped of everything she'd schemed for. The Eastern Lords had been brought to heel, the territories were at peace, and in a palace that had once been cold with the Alpha King's isolation, warmth had finally taken root. This was her life now. Not a branded Omega with nothing, but a Luna, a queen, a mate, a mother. This was her happily ever after. And as Fenris's voice wove through the quiet room, as their daughter dreamed and their bond hummed and the world outside continued to spin, Ivy smiled. She was home.